Today we read from the book of the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 12, verse 24, through to chapter 13, verse 5. In this Easter season, the lectionary directs us to read from Acts, since it covers the story of the developing early church, from the gift of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, through the spread of the young church community around the Mediterranean world, up to the point where Paul arrived in Rome. That in itself was a breakthrough, since from Rome the gospel would travel to all corners of the huge Roman Empire. There was no stopping it from then on. Today's passage gives us the very beginning of the ministry of St. Paul, or Saul, as he was then known by his Hebrew name. He later changed it to Paul to be a more inclusive figure. You would not know yet that Paul was to be the main character for the bulk of Acts, or the foremost missionary of the first century. That was yet to come. Now, Barnabas was the better known name, as a prophet in the church community at Antioch, and he introduced Saul as a new convert to the others. His name means son of encouragement, and it seems to have been true to his nature. He encouraged Saul by trusting him and leading him to meet the apostles. And he also encouraged a younger man, John Mark, who makes his first appearance here. John, also called Mark, may have been Mark the second evangelist, who was probably the first to compile a gospel. If that sounds confusing, I'm afraid the books of the Bible weren't printed in the order they were written. So today's theme seems to be about encouragement and nurture of the young, the younger generation. We can all agree about how important this is. The Old Testament exhorts parents to pass on the traditions of faith to their children from generation to generation, so that they should not be lost or forgotten. In the days when print was unknown or rare, this was the only way of conserving traditions and stories. So, for example, the story of the Exodus was rehearsed at every annual Passover meal, and still is. Perhaps you remember Sunday school classes or confirmation classes when you learnt the stories and beliefs of Christianity. Or maybe you had godparents or grandparents who read Bible stories to you. One way or another, the young need to be nurtured in the faith, and we ought to regard this as a high priority. Here at the cathedral, we're very fortunate in having a large Sunday school, supported by a big team of volunteer leaders. Our children are very well taught. The many Church in Wales schools across the diocese also do a brilliant job of passing on the faith to children and teenagers. When parents are concerned about young children being noisy in church, I always tell them not to worry. I will remember being glared at from the pulpit when my own children were young and fidgety and having to take them out. This was not an encouraging experience in my spiritual journey. I vowed that would never be the case in any church for which I was responsible. Every child or young person in church or in Sunday school is having a formative experience each time. Will it form them into disciples of Jesus, or will it put them off for life? Will it make them feel they have to grow up or become different in some way before they matter to God? Heaven forbid. Will it encourage them by affirming and valuing them as they are, and extending God's generous and unconditional welcome to them? I pray that it will. John Mark had an interesting time on that missionary journey. It did not all go smoothly, but it was no doubt a learning and a formative experience for him. If this was the person who wrote the Gospel of Mark, we owe him a great debt, and he turned out rather well. Thank you, Barnabas, for encouraging him in his youth when he still had a lot to learn.